If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 50, The Main Trumpet, Aura, is useless. Let's practice the trumpet, Liney. In this world, which seemed frozen in the Middle Ages from 1,000 years ago, with no progress at all, the top leaders of the goddess cult held seats of power in various nations. In such a situation, if the bishop couldn't be controlled, it would definitely cause a major problem. After all, Aura's magic had a significant flaw: people with strong wills would occasionally resist her influence. This was why she had taken the heads of those she'd controlled. Luckily, this particular country didn't have any strong-willed senior officials, and it seemed the same could be said for most of the nobles here. But after 2 or 3 countries, there might appear a rare, determined noble. If such a person were to make contact with a domestic bishop, it would lead to trouble. Even if they continued to eliminate or detain the bishops of newly occupied territories, they would inevitably attract the attention of the goddess church. And while the goddess church might not immediately understand why they were targeting its leaders, with enough cases, the holy city would eventually organize a crusade. This was exactly what Ash wanted to avoid. After all, his goal wasn't to spark a large-scale civil war among humans. Even without one, if humans discovered Aura's existence, they would likely form an elite force to hunt the two of them. Thus, it made the most sense to stabilize the country first and carefully nurture it, minimizing risks. As for time, they had an abundance of it. This was the strategy Ash had taught her. After establishing this chess piece, he intended to move forward, step by step. Aura, however, seemed somewhat reluctant. But, having lost to him previously, she couldn't object, so she planned to rest and recuperate in the castle for a while. Soon after, he even brought along the most delicate of his clan, the young Liney, to keep her safe from harm, while the others remained to guard the castle with the undead army. Bringing too many demons here would increase their risk of exposure. Half a month passed in the blink of an eye after taking over the kingdom. Liney, a girl who always preferred dark corners, had been quietly observing Ash since arriving at the castle. This led Ash, who had been managing government affairs on behalf of the former king, a man who had been consumed by his own vices and negligent in all respects, to pause his work, crouching in front of Liney, studying her closely. Liney, seemingly unfazed by his scrutiny, merely bit into her fresh apple, returning his gaze with a neutral expression. After a moment, she paused from eating her apple and asked, puzzled. "What's wrong, Master Ash? Did I do something wrong?" "No, not really." "Oh. Yes." Their conversation seemed to reach a stopping point, but noticing he was still staring at her, Liney instinctively held out the apple to him. "Master Ash, would you like an apple too?" "No, but, you do seem to like apples." "Because I was born in an apple orchard, and I ate apples all the time when I was little." "I see. So, what are you interested in?" "Interest? Observation. That's really, quite interesting." Confronted with this child, who tilted her head in innocent confusion and looked at him intently, Ash found himself genuinely uncertain about how to communicate with her. Ash pondered silently. Was it because Aura was too old to connect with children? Could it be the infamous generational gap? But Aura hadn't always been this cold, had she? Was it Liney or Aura who was acting strangely? Ash found himself unconsciously patting Liney's head, feeling a mixture of emotions and doubt about which of them to suspect. There was no helping it, he'd had too little contact with demons, and the ones he had encountered were too extreme. "So, what kind of magic are you good at?" "Imitation. Aura-sama said I have excellent perception, so I can observe and remember others' actions, then use them myself." "That's really, sounds impressive." In truth, he wasn't sure how powerful this imitation magic could be, but he offered casual praise and turned back to his work, leaving his doubts aside for now. After all, normal demons had no interest in taking care of children, potential strength in the future meant nothing without power now. No one in the demon clan looked to the future. They only associated with others of similar strength, or dominated those who weren't as strong but still capable. But Aura had taken in a child who, for now, was essentially useless, something that clearly went against the logic of demons. So, in the end, was Aura the odd one here? And, why did he have to be the one stuck doing these menial tasks? Shouldn't the king just be free to enjoy himself? The previous king had the same idea. "That's why you have to work now." Aura overheard his grumbling, her eyes fixed leisurely on her magic book, legs crossed, a sarcastic tone in her voice that made him bristle. It was clear as day that even if he threw his complaints at Aura, it wouldn't solve a thing. Angry and annoyed, Ash could only bury himself in work. He held Liney on his lap, writing with one hand, while gently stroking Liney's hair with the other, sighing inwardly. Well, since you didn't succeed with your first try, you should just keep practicing. Liney, be a good child, I mean it. I'll definitely train you into one. And then have lots of children for Ash. Liney asked innocently. The question startled him so much he nearly jumped. What? Where did that come from? Am I that corrupting? How could you think that? The women in the palace say all men think that way, isn't it true? Of course not. I'm nothing like the men you've heard about. Don't go learning bad ideas from them. He scolded, frowning. Liney nodded, looking up at him blankly. Really? I'm sorry. Please, I want you to grow into an excellent manager and work for me. If you end up like Aura, I'll faint. Although he said this, Ash worried a little that palace life would have a negative influence on children. He wasn't exactly confident in his own ability to be a good role model either. But, for now, he just wanted to train a serious subordinate, one who wouldn't die at the first sign of trouble, ideally someone as loyal and capable as Schlacht was to the Demon King. Otherwise, he'd be stuck dealing with one thing after another every day, with no time to rest, and he'd end up a merciless work machine, like he was right now. If he wanted to see Frieren, it would probably be another month before he could even consider it. Chapter 51, Obstructed Development, Anticipated Adventure. Under normal circumstances, taking over as king should mean a life of endless enjoyment. But for Ash, it had transformed into endless overtime, making him question why he'd chosen to take on such a thankless task in the first place. Yet, since he'd already taken over the kingdom, he couldn't just abandon it, leaving it poorly managed would feel wrong. So, he forced himself to continue working. Just like that, a month slipped by in the blink of an eye. On the eve of his scheduled departure, he found himself still working overtime, preparing arrangements for the kingdom during his absence. And then, "Come on," Ash patted his thigh, and Liney, the quiet girl who usually lurked in the shadows, understood the signal and approached him. She climbed onto his lap without hesitation, willingly acting as a personal heater on this cold northern night. Feeling her warmth in his arms, he experienced a rare touch of comfort in this harsh world, but... "Liney, you must work hard and not let me down." "Yes, Master Ash." Liney nodded with obedient sincerity, showing no resistance. She was indeed well behaved, but, after an entire month, there didn't seem to be much progress. Maybe he was being too impatient, but the most notable change he'd observed was her understanding his gesture of tapping his thigh, then coming over to sit on his lap unprompted. This odd progress made him feel strangely unsettled, even causing him to question his own life choices. Aura, who was flipping through a magic book beside him, noticed his unusually gloomy expression and couldn't resist poking fun. "Ash, are you really training your future woman here? Just like the king before you. Don't think of me as some twisted pervert. I'm not raising anyone for that purpose." "So, you'll do it without raising her?" "I've heard a lot of nobles in this kingdom prefer that approach. Actually, it seems like most nobles in human lands have those interests. I didn't expect you to pick it up so quickly after becoming a noble. Looks can be so deceiving." Aura covered her mouth with one hand, smirking as the words "enjoying this" practically shone on her face. Ash shot her a glare. "Enough with your nonsense. Sometimes, I really wonder if you're even a demon. You're hardly one to talk, Ash." "Fine, I don't want to argue with you. Just help me find a proper teacher for the child soon." After training Liney for a month, Ash realized he didn't have the spare energy to teach a child on top of his duties. He'd have to delegate, but... "Why are you staring at me like that?" Ash's gaze lingered on Aura for a moment, and she turned away, as if subtly signaling her lack of interest in handling the responsibility. This only confirmed his suspicion, this particular ally was of little help. Sighing, he set Liney down and approached Aura. Lightly tapping her on the head, he ensured she faced him directly and then spoke, enunciating each word. "I'm simply asking you to find a teacher for this child. Don't delay it. Also, I have to leave tomorrow for some important matters, so please secure a good teacher and stay in line. I likely won't return for a while, so from now on, the kingdom and Liney are in your care, understand? Are you still worried about me? It's you that I can't be at ease with." Though he was concerned about Aura, he was also worried about others. All he could do at the moment was place a hand on her head, giving it a gentle shake before sighing in reluctant surrender. But I really do have to rely on you. Ash, you're always so long-winded. Hasn't anything changed in these 500 years? Do you think I want to be like this? Don't you? Aura started, then hesitated. Never mind. I'll handle it properly. Satisfied? Aura frowned, choosing to abandon any further rebuttal. This surprised Ash slightly. He reached over to tidy up her tousled hair, a smile of relief crossing his face as he said, Aura, you're finally starting to understand a bit about my role as an elder. You mean, the joy of bullying the younger generation. Oh, stop talking nonsense. Have I ever bullied you? Aura didn't respond, simply looking at him with an expressionless face. Reluctantly, he raised his hands in mock surrender. All right, maybe a little. But you can't just pick up all my bad habits, you know? There are good ones too. Oh? And what's good? Let me think about it. Though he believed he'd been a decent role model in the past, the question took him by surprise. Smiling awkwardly but politely, he stood and patted Aura on the head. Anyway, it's late. You should get to bed, or you'll never grow taller. With that, he turned and began to leave, but Aura suddenly grabbed the edge of his cloak, her expression shifting into a sly smile. Don't worry, I'm already 500 years old. But don't you want to share what exactly your good qualities are? Don't make me hit you before I leave. His smile vanished, and he turned back, giving her a pointed stare that made Aura release her hold. Clicking his tongue in mild annoyance, he muttered, Tisk, the answer still ends up being force, doesn't it? The result matters, the process, not so much. Isn't that usually what villains say? Enough bickering. I have a lot to do and no time for your nonsense. Tiring of this rebellious banter, he took Liney, who had been quietly listening to their argument, and made a quick exit. Left alone, Aura watched him depart, a mischievous grin spreading across her face. Busy, aren't you? Wanting to be a good king but lacking capable people, of course, you need a loyal executioner. Liney happens to be a good child. Oh, I'm so considerate. To avoid any potential scolding, she decided to carry out the task, but with her own twist. She'd ensure Liney became a loyal executioner, but wouldn't bother teaching her any government skills. After all, when the time came, she could simply say that demons were suited only for battle. The following morning, eager to escape work and ready for a bit of adventure, he left the royal city at dawn. I hear there's an old elf lady out there, but there's also supposed to be one that looks like a dwarf? And according to tradition, there's bound to be a brave, beautiful girl, a gentle priest sister, maybe even a little dwarf loli. This is really exciting. He murmured, grinning to himself as he quickened his pace. It wasn't that he considered himself indecent, he thought he was perfectly normal. But after all these years, he hadn't met many beautiful women, or even any who were remotely interesting. He just wanted a taste of youthful adventure. So, as he left the royal city and Aura behind, his mood lifted noticeably, his steps growing lighter. For the first time in what felt like ages, he felt as if the long-awaited breeze of youth was finally blowing his way. Chapter 52. The thought of reuniting with Frieren, joining the hero team, and spending time together made Ash so eager that he left the kingdom almost as soon as everything was in place, departing even faster than when he'd arrived. After working, struggling, and striving for so long, he figured a bit of relaxation wasn't too much to ask. After all, while certain duties awaited him, he couldn't let work consume every day, otherwise, he feared he might actually become a stereotypical demon. Though, he mused, most demons wouldn't be caught dead working for themselves. Still, with that anticipation driving him, what had taken 3 months to arrive took only 2 on the return as he flew tirelessly at high speed. Originally, he expected it would take another month to track down Frieren, but he quickly found leads using Frieren's distinctive, rare, and eye-catching elven features as a beacon, and was surprised to discover that the hero team she had joined hadn't even left her original country. Thus, within 3 days, he spotted the familiar figure in a village, though to his bewilderment, Frieren was using magic to help farmers pull up radishes. The petite, silver-haired elf with a fairy-like appearance and youthful look noticed him almost immediately as he stood there, astonished. Her eyes widened in surprise, and she hurried over. Ash, why, are you here? Frieren asked, her face filled with curiosity. Well, I heard you finally set out, so I thought I'd come to check on you, he replied. He couldn't exactly admit, I just wanted to see what the royal hero team was like, so he offered a vague smile and patted her gently on the head. Really? Thank you, but I'm fine. The question is, where have you been all this time? She asked, smiling unconsciously, her face alight with the joy of seeing him again. She'd thought she might never see him again, believing his time was running short, so this meeting was more than she'd expected. Me? Actually, I just found a warm, pleasant place. Retirement? She asked, hesitating. Hey? Retirement? I mean, preparing for future retirement. Feeling as if she'd tread on sensitive ground about his age, Frieren awkwardly tried to cover it up. Normally, Ash wouldn't have been fooled by such an attempt, but he didn't pay it any mind. Instead, he scanned the area around them with curious eyes, hoping to spot her intriguing teammates. However, instead of the imagined group of beautiful heroines, lively young girls, or wise women, there was a young man with an indeterminate age approaching them. The man, with green hair slicked back, wore narrow-framed glasses and a black priest's robe trimmed in gold. He approached slowly, watching Ash with a hint of curiosity. Once closer, he looked to Frieren before speaking. It's unusual to see you smiling at someone like that, Frieren, he commented. Just a friend, no. Frieren paused, choosing her words carefully before adding seriously. Ash is a good friend I've known for a long time, and we share a lot of complicated history. Frieren finally introduced him with a serious tone. Why so formal all of a sudden? Are you feeling okay? Ash, unused to her earnest words, looked a little uncomfortable. Placing a hand on her forehead as if checking her temperature, he mumbled with a faint grin under her annoyed glare, doesn't feel like you're sick. As I suspected, he's just an acquaintance. Frieren quickly swatted his hand away, immediately regretting her earlier thoughtfulness. When it came to someone like him, worrying about hurting feelings was simply wasting her energy. Haha, you two really do seem to have a good connection, the bespectacled priest remarked, chuckling as he watched their dynamic. Then, turning his gaze to Ash, he noted, but considering you're a friend of Frieren, it's not surprising, you seem quite powerful yourself. Well, I'd say I'm decent. No, your magic aura is vast. Yet, before getting close to you, it's barely detectable. Such fine control of magic is not something you see every day, the monk continued, adjusting his glasses with a look of sincere admiration. Especially at your age, it's hard to imagine the level you could reach in the future. Really? Thanks, and hey, you're pretty strong yourself. Have country priest always been this impressive? Country priest? The monk gave him a surprised look, and Ash, noting his expression, felt a subtle idea forming in his mind. Hey? Wait a second, don't tell me. The bespectacled priest blinked at Ash, puzzled at first. Then, catching on, he smiled slightly and clarified, no, I'm not from this village. Allow me to introduce myself, I'm Frieren's companion, one of the heroes on the journey to defeat the Demon King. You can call me Hater. Is that so? What's the matter? Am I not what you expected? Hater asked, noticing Ash's expression of disbelief. No, it's just, isn't the priest in the heroes' party usually, well, a woman? And maybe, older? Ash replied, looking genuinely dismayed. Hater chuckled wryly at Ash's remark. Yes, but wouldn't ordinary women find it difficult to meet the rigorous demands of becoming a priest? Are you serious? You didn't know? How could I? It's not like I've ever visited a church or studied with a priest. Ash insisted, looking at Frieren for validation. At this point, Frieren, feeling slightly embarrassed by his ignorance, nudged him lightly with her foot. If you're just here to stir up confusion, maybe you should head back. Ash protested immediately. Wait, Frieren. Didn't Flam say that only women could be priest in the hero team? She even claimed it was an old tradition and suggested I should consider becoming a hero myself. Frieren raised her eyebrows, her expression a mix of surprise and amusement. Yes. Now that you mention it, I vaguely remember that conversation. The teacher did say that, but if I recall, it was mostly a ploy to lure you into the role. Why? Why would she lie about something like that? Ash looked genuinely troubled, his voice a mix of frustration and betrayal. Frieren sighed as if recalling a long-buried memory. Back then, weren't you always sneaking around, fascinated with the emperor's concubines? You even tried climbing the palace walls to get a glimpse. So she assumed you had a preference for older women and figured a story about priest heroines would appeal to you. What? The revelation hit Ash like a ton of bricks, leaving him utterly speechless. He couldn't have predicted that all these years, such a strange and deeply misguided assumption about his preferences had shaped Flam's attempts to influence him. Whether it was about older sisters or whatever else, he knew one thing: being mistaken for someone interested in other people's wives was simply too much. Chapter 53, I am the only big sister here. Frieren's skepticism was nearly written across her face as she eyed him with a look that hinted at her perception of his supposed interest in older and married women. Ash, who saw himself as a respectable young man with merely unique tastes, found himself cornered into an explanation. He crouched slightly, patted Frieren on the head, and said with utmost seriousness, No matter how many times I need to explain it, I really just got lost. Please stop spreading nonsense in front of others. Or our friendship ends here. Lost? And you climbed over the wall. If you're lost and can't find a way out, climbing a wall to figure it out, is totally reasonable, isn't it? Frieren tilted her head in doubt, while Ash kept a completely serious look, trying to establish his innocence. Yet, after all these years, she still hadn't believed this explanation. Now, naturally suspicious, she pressed on, so you climbed over a wall straight into someone's harem. That's a matter of chance, and it's certainly not my fault. His earnestness made Frieren pause. She couldn't tell if he was sincere, but she muttered under her breath, Aren't you ashamed discussing this out in the open? Instead of shame, I feel more annoyed. Why would you just reveal my secrets out of nowhere? What if your teammates think I'm some kind of creep? Do you have a problem with that? Yes, absolutely. I'm not who Flam thinks I am. Even without a big sister around, I'd still want to be a hero. So let me join your party. He extended his hand toward Frieren, wearing his most sincere expression. Frieren, however, didn't reach back, instead narrowing her eyes as she looked him up and down. You're not doing this for some peculiar reason, are you? How could you question a friend like that? Don't you know who I am by now? Ash spoke with a noble air, but Frieren, recalling the scene of him back in the village dragging Millie into drinking contests and leaving her dangling upside down, struggled to contain her suspicion. Without thinking, she retorted, You're not exactly the type to risk your life just for the sake of humanity. Don't look down on me just because you're short. I'm willing to give my best for you, too. That sounds great, but do you actually believe that yourself? Of course. If I don't even believe in myself, then who else would? Good question. I'm curious who actually would believe what you're saying. Just tell me a name. Go on, don't think, just say it. Michael Jackson. Although Ash believed he was indeed contributing to world peace, he couldn't think of anyone who would believe he'd fight for it, so he instinctively blurted out a random name. It wasn't that he was lying or had a poor character, it was simply that he didn't have many close friends. Frieren quickly asked, What do they do? Who else is at home? A singer. Lives alone. And how did you meet? It was a dark and windy night. He tried to paint a dramatic scene, but Frieren narrowed her eyes and interrupted, Ash, are you lying to me? Just tell me, did I give a name or not? When did you start lying as much as Master? I'd like to think I'm at least a bit better than Flam. Even as he compared himself to Flam, Ash's expression grew slightly uneasy. At first glance, Flam seemed like a respectable person, someone who only pretended to be harmless. But in reality, even during training, Flam would lose all sense of shame, begging for mercy in various ways, softening others' hearts before launching sneak attacks. Having been fooled by Flam so many times, Fulilian had developed a healthy skepticism toward others' motives. Naturally, she didn't fully believe that Ash was being honest from the beginning. Besides, she didn't plan to let him join their mission. Her friend was at an age where he should be enjoying retirement, and she wasn't going to let him do whatever he wanted. Adventure? Facing demons? What if his old bones gave out? It didn't make sense, no matter how she thought about it. Ash's outstretched hand hung in midair, waiting for someone to take it, and the atmosphere grew strained as it hovered unclaimed. Feeling defeated, he was about to pull it back when suddenly, another hand appeared and clasped his firmly. Oh, oh. He looked up in surprise, feeling slightly dejected, only to find himself looking into the face of a young man with a light blue mushroom head hairstyle, dressed in a white cloak and blue clothes, smiling brightly. I believe in you, Mr. Ash, join us in our mission. Ash froze slightly, instinctively trying to pull his hand back while cautiously asking, excuse me, who are? I'm Himmel. Ah, I see. And so that means? One of Frieren's companions, Himmel replied cheerfully. Is this real? Certainly. Anything strange about that? No, well. Ash felt bewildered again, casting a questioning glance toward Frieren. But this time, Frieren simply sighed, if you're expecting the version of things that Flam told you, forget it. I'm the only big sister here. Haha. Seems like you've picked up Flam's knack for stretching the truth, too, Ash said with a tired laugh, unable to hide a hint of disbelief. Frieren immediately frowned in irritation. What's that supposed to mean? There aren't many big sisters like me. Big sister, ah. Looking at the petite, lily-like girl in front of him, hands on her hips, puffing out her chest in a determined attempt to look mature, Ash found it impossible not to feel the urge to laugh at her exaggerated display. After a moment's pause, he held back his laughter, saying with mock seriousness, yes, yes, a big sister indeed. Chapter 54, The Difference Between Ideal and Reality. Not only did she refer to herself as a big sister, but truthfully, she could barely even be called a girl. The reality was that this poor elf, who clearly looked quite mature, proudly stood there with her hands on her hips and her chest puffed out, proclaiming herself as a big sister. To be honest, Ash had begun to suspect that this naive elf was poking fun at his dreams, mocking his goals in her own roundabout way. But he was too tired to argue with Frieren, so he quickly glanced around, changing the subject with a sigh, forget that, how about a dwarf lady? If that's not an option, maybe the legendary dwarf lowly girl would work. Dwarf lady? What do you mean by dwarf? Wait, what do you mean by compared to this? Are you seriously looking down on me? Frieren's eyes widened in offense. She was about to argue, but a rather rough voice interrupted from behind, if you're talking about dwarves, I'm already here. Ash winced at the deep, gravelly tone, holding his forehead with one hand and muttering, I suddenly have a bad feeling, although, maybe dwarves do sound rough? I mean, they must inhale so much dust from mining, so it would make sense for their voices to be affected. Why would dwarves need to mine? Frieren asked, puzzled. Isn't that what the stories say? Ash replied without much thought, which left Frieren at a loss. She looked at him, half exasperated, how old are you? Or have you just been staying in the mountains all these years? Well, I was mostly training, so yeah, I've never really met a dwarf, he replied. Right, you're an absolute training fanatic, she sighed, finally understanding him a bit more. No wonder you got tricked by the master and ended up in such remote places. Actually, dwarves don't mine. We're mostly warriors, said a rough-voiced dwarf with a super long yellow beard, a horned helmet, and a double-bladed axe strapped to his back, as he walked up beside Ash. Ash's shoulders drooped as he realized the painful truth, you mean Flam lied to me again? The massive difference between the lowly elf he envisioned and this tough dwarf uncle was so striking that Ash could hardly take it. He was momentarily dazed, his mind struggling to keep up with this jarring reality. With a sigh, he turned around, crouched down, and placed his hands over his head, as if he was trying to ward off the overwhelming realization that his expectations had shattered into a million pieces. He had to admit, deep down, part of his desire to become a hero stemmed from the hope of meeting all sorts of beautiful girls. That's why he'd been so eager to believe Flam's tales, no matter how dubious. But perhaps that's just how humans are, drawn to enticing dreams even when they know they might end up disappointed. After so much anticipation and so many disappointments, he'd hoped that perhaps, just perhaps, he might meet a dwarf lowly to bridge the gap between the reality and his imagined world. Not that he was a lowly enthusiast, far from it. He just thought that at least if there were a cute, younger girl around, someone a bit more lively than Frieren, it might make up for the harshness of the world a bit. Not that he'd actually do anything, of course. He was a serious person and far too honest to act on any attraction to a lowly, but there was something endearing about teasing one occasionally, wasn't there? But... are you all right? The dwarf man loomed before him, looking at him curiously. Although he was typically silent, he couldn't help but ask, by the way, are you a warrior? Or a magician? Ash took a closer look. The dwarf uncle's entire face below his eyes was engulfed in an overly dense beard that cascaded down to his chest. His helmet obscured the area above his forehead, leaving only his 2 eyes visible. This beard, so much of it. Is this really reality? Cruel and ruthless, with no beauty at all, Ash muttered, entirely ignoring the dwarf's question as he unconsciously reached out to tug at the thick beard in front of him. The strange texture made him certain this was indeed an uncle and definitely not a lowly. The sheer length and volume of the beard allowed only the dwarf's eyes to be visible, with no other features discernible at all. But, even if he were to imagine a lowly of this kind, Ash felt sure he'd never accept such an odd lowly. The gap between his ideal and reality plunged Ash into a state of quiet despair, and he continued to tug on the overly long beard unconsciously. The dwarf warrior appeared increasingly distressed, turning to Frieren for help. Is this your friend? What's wrong with him? Could you please ask him to let go of my beard? Sorry, Eisen, this guy is a little strange. But I'll have a good talk with him. Although she wanted to pretend she didn't know him, Frieren couldn't simply abandon him. She slapped his hand, still playing with the beard, grabbed his arm, and dragged him a short distance away. Once they were far enough, she turned to him with a long, weary sigh. Ash, what on earth are you doing here? Well. He hesitated momentarily before saying, actually, I'm worried about your safety. After all, the Demon King is very dangerous, isn't he? Stop lying. You're just looking for a girl, aren't you? But as you can see, there's no pretty girl here except me. Go back quickly, shoo. Frieren waved her hands as if she were shooing away a stray cat. I won't comment on your self-assessment, but you can't stop my yearning for stories. A story about a chance encounter with a beautiful girl. I have aspirations for that, yes, but I'm also somewhat interested in serious adventures. He stated his thoughts earnestly, as the curious voice of the dwarf, Eisen, sounded from behind. What? You want to join too? On second thought, maybe I'll reconsider. Ash glanced back at the dwarf uncle, then looked at the remaining 2 male companions who were far from his expectations, and he silently began to worry once more. This team looked more like a ragtag group of minor characters likely to perish halfway through than a proper hero's party bound for triumph. The 2 people who supposedly could predict the future hadn't even hinted at which team would defeat the Demon King, making him genuinely worried about Frieren's chances of survival on the journey. From his impression, Frank, who'd vowed to pave the way forward, seemed more like someone who might emerge victorious in the end. In other words, was this team doomed to fail partway? Or would they somehow manage to defeat the Demon King? The uncertainty gnawed at him. What's wrong, Ash? Why are you? Frieren noticed his expression, a mix of concern and apprehension. She paused, surprised, but then seemed to pick up on his thoughts, and a warm smile softened her face. I didn't expect you would actually worry about me. Chapter 55, Temporarily Joining the Brave, Sightseeing, Team as a Tourist. Frieren's smile seemed to carry a silent trust. Only now did Ash start to believe in this feeling, making him, who was genuinely worried about her, feel somewhat awkward. You said that from the start, didn't you? You believe me now? What happened to our friendship? He asked, slightly teasing. It's fine. I can take care of myself, she replied. Avoiding the friendship part, hey? But no one can guarantee they won't run into trouble, right? You didn't seem this worried before, she replied, laughing at his almost paternal concern. Frieren didn't voice her thoughts aloud but looked at him with some hesitation. While I appreciate your worry, are you really okay? Health? You look pretty healthy to me. If it's just a while, I don't mind. But I doubt I'll experience the luxury that Flam mentioned, she said with a small laugh, realizing Ash's reason for wanting to see the grand team Flam spoke of might just be an excuse. People their age shouldn't be chasing the wild dreams of youth. Yet Frieren jokingly offered a bit of caution, even as she made a small compromise. What are you talking about? I really did want to become a hero at one point. Please don't lump me in with Flam 8. He replied, feeling her perception of him had missed the mark. In truth, Ash found himself misunderstanding the entire team just as much. Their leisurely pace hardly looked like a world-saving party, more like a group on a sightseeing tour, perhaps even attempting to drain the royal treasury. If the fate of defeating the Demon King truly rested on them, who knew how long the Northern War would drag on? After all, the kingdoms on the Empire's western front had already been destroyed when he arrived. If he waited for this group to save the world, probably only the Empire would survive in the north. And honestly, from what he could see of their skills, none seemed capable of defeating the Demon King. So, it might as well be an extended diversion. Besides, he had time to spare. If he spent every day training without purpose, who knew how many thousands of years he'd go on like this? Eventually, he felt, he'd go mad from boredom. Meanwhile, as Ash and Frieren continued their conversation, 3 companions nearby observed them with curiosity. I never would have guessed Frieren actually had old friends, Himmel commented with a smile. And she looks genuinely happy? I thought she'd be a lot more indifferent. Still, their acquaintance, this Flam fellow, that's the same name as the legendary ancestor of human magic, isn't it? She must be quite powerful if she trained someone like her. Eisen nodded, stroking his beard in admiration. Yet, like everyone else, none of them suspected that the Flam Ash and Frieren were speaking of could actually be the legendary Flam. Hader gazed at Ash's back unconsciously, a hint of worry crossing his face. His strength is undeniable, but he carries the scent of blood. Maybe he's just a battle-hardened magician. One of them suggested. If that's all, then it's fine. Frieren's friends must be good people, Himmel said confidently, trusting without any particular reason. When Ash and Frieren returned, Himmel, wanting to ease her companion's concerns, asked directly, Ash, it might be a bit forward, but could you tell us about your previous occupation? Me? A hard-working civil servant, I suppose. He grew slightly pensive, remembering the long hours he'd once spent in service of the king. Frieren noticed the underlying tension and looked at Ash inquisitively. But he merely shook his head and admitted, there's no need to hide it. To be honest, I was a deserter once. A deserter? Himmel appeared a bit startled. I got tired of humanity's endless conflicts. So you just left? But is it safe to say this openly? Couldn't there be consequences if you are found out? She asked. It's not a big concern. I don't think anyone could actually defeat me, Ash replied nonchalantly. Haha, so it's simply a matter of winning or losing. Himmel chuckled bitterly, sensing how different this was from the usual human mindset. He didn't seem to care about conforming to the law. But Ash added, besides, nobody from that country would even remember me. Forgotten? Himmel echoed in surprise, while Hader was even more taken aback. That's incredible. Could it be that the country has perished? There's a nation in the north on the brink of collapse, interjected Eisen, the dwarf, sighing as he closed his eyes. That's why I keep saying we need to pick up the pace. At this rate, who knows how many more nations will fall. The South's strongest hero is already in the north, and we haven't even managed to pass through a single country. Then let him go first, Himmel replied with a smile, because, isn't there joy in doing what you love while helping others? Imagine adventuring, clearing out dungeons, slaying monsters, hunting for treasure, and then, before you know it, saving the world. Wouldn't that be amazing? Eisen, who was clearly more serious-minded, just sighed. This wasn't the first time they'd had this kind of conversation, so he simply refrained from saying more. But as he started to quiet down, he seemed to remember something and added thoughtfully, but if we could hurry up, we'd help people sooner by defeating the Demon King. And they pressed him. I heard rumors of a terrifying demon appearing in the north. It supposedly fell from the sky like a meteorite, striking at the Empire's rear. During a series of indiscriminate attacks, it killed many noblemen and even leveled 3 cities, resulting in at least 100,000 casualties. Eisen's words were solemn, but Ash's expression became subtly strained as he listened. After all, he knew they were talking about him. Although he lacked horns, the fact he'd fallen from the sky was enough to make people mistake him for a demon. In the heat of battle, details often got lost. Even though he was certain he'd never actually destroyed a city, the rumors had clearly been exaggerated. Perhaps it was to intensify the sense of urgency, as if Flam was trying to lure him or others to become heroes and join the front lines against the Demon King's army. Regardless, Ash listened quietly, adopting the role of an uninvolved passerby while blending temporarily into this band of warriors. Chapter 56, Paving the Way, Necessary Sacrifices. I joined the brave team under somewhat unusual circumstances, and quite a bit of time passed in the blink of an eye. But, the good things I had imagined never came to be. It was exactly as Frieren had said, no encounters with beautiful girls, just rather boring and leisurely days. Instead of rushing to save the world, it felt more like what Ash had guessed from the beginning, a sightseeing tour, traveling around and exploring dungeons. Although it was far from the thrilling adventure one might expect, it wasn't bad at all. But, in fact, those quiet days didn't last long. One day, Ash seemed to remember something, and with little explanation, he said he had something urgent to do, briefly said goodbye to everyone, and flew back north, taking Liney with him. He had the child accompany him to watch and record the fighting style of Frank, the brave of the South. As the strongest human warrior, Frank's ability to see the future couldn't be imitated, yet he was powerful enough in close combat to remain at the top even without it. After completing this task, Ash sent Liney back, bade farewell to Frank, and prepared to continue sightseeing with Frieren and the others, just to relax. But don't be in such a hurry to leave. Let's have a drink first. Frank, in an inexplicably good mood, dragged him off to the pub, and they drank all night. By the time the night was filled with food and drink. My friend, this is where we part. Farewell. With a dramatic sweep of his cloak, Frank turned and strode off with a heroic grin. Ash watched him disappear down the quiet streets under the night sky, waving goodbye without looking back. Haha, this feels strange, Ash muttered, chuckling as he finished the wine in his glass, then shook his head and stood up. But just as he was about to leave, he noticed a note by Frank's seat. For some reason, Frank had left a letter asking Ash to return to his hometown. It seemed that when Ash had been training with Schlacht had left behind a letter in the small house where he used to live. Two rough guys trying to plan something like this. Ash was a bit dumbfounded, but he didn't dwell on it too much. He simply made his way slowly from the northern lands back to the southern countries. Following the instructions, he located the parchment, wrapped in a wooden box, inside the hut. First of all, by the time you read this, we will all be gone. This isn't due to any sudden change, but rather a long echoing consequence of fate, a destiny, if you will. This battle isn't just for you, but for the future of the demon clan 1,000 years from now. While you are still young, you are strong enough to defeat ordinary demons. Yet, this is not the right time for you to ascend the throne. In the demon world, strength commands respect. Without the power to shake the heavens and the earth, no one will submit. Additionally, the human expedition teams and brave squads will see you as a thorn in their side and will be resolved to eliminate you. Therefore, should you seek to ascend the throne upon the fall of the Demon King, you will undoubtedly usher in an all-out war throughout the world, including within the demon clan itself. You still need to settle down for a while and build strength on your own. This journey will be lonely and long, requiring extraordinary patience and quiet endurance until the time is right. Remember this. What is this? Ash stared, dumbfounded, at the parchment in his hands. He understood the message all too well. Simply waiting for the Demon King to die before stepping up, without the power to conquer the world, he would be doomed quickly, lacking the Demon King's strength. But what truly shocked him was, these two strongest warriors after the Demon King and Seria were going to die suddenly. Or was it that now, they were already dead? At the same time Ash was reading the parchment, in the northern land, Schlacht's sharp blade pierced Frank's back. Frank, equally battered and wounded, charged forward and drove his sword into Schlacht's heart. In that very moment, both dealt each other fatal blows, yet, as if in silent agreement, they paused and withdrew temporarily. This is a farewell forever, Schlacht murmured quietly, gazing up at the sky before lowering his eyes to the man standing unsteadily before him. As expected, no matter what, our first meeting would inevitably end like this. Ha, ha ha, there's nothing we can do. If things go on like this, the Demon King will always remain the Demon King. In the future Frank had foreseen, each time Frieren's team defeated a truly powerful demon, they were always on the verge of failure, though they had yet to face 3 such foes at once. Leaving Aura aside, the immortal Bose, one of the 7 sages of destruction, had intended to trap and kill them all with a barrier. Frieren had almost accepted defeat, only to die in the end out of sheer arrogance. When it came to the sage of corruption Qual, they couldn't defeat him outright. Instead, they devised a plan to seal him, barely surviving the ordeal. Without making sacrifices, without defeating enough powerful demons, they would never be able to reach the Demon King. In this chaotic battlefield, none of the 7 sages of destruction except Aura were present. A demon comparable to the sages had been sent to help instead. The remaining sages of destruction gathered together, seemingly able to crush an entire country. But even with 8 fighting against 1, 3 of the sages of destruction fell to Frank's blade, some even perishing alongside Schlacht. This, as Frank had once said, was the true meaning of paving the way, whether for Frieren or for Ash. Now he was fulfilling that promise. Schlacht and Frank met each other's gaze in silence. Then, summoning the last of their strength, they charged at one another again, blood covering their bodies. Bang! The collision of swords erupted in fierce sparks and unleashed powerful shockwaves. No one could count the number of times their swords and sabers intertwined in that deadly dance. Though both had suffered mortal injuries, they seemed ready for one final clash. Yet, in the next instant, no one knew who pushed whom, and together they tumbled off the cliff. "This is a necessary sacrifice, isn't it?" murmured Frank to the blue sky as he fell. "It can be considered." Schlacht's eyes quietly closed in the next moment. The moment they fell, the cliff above crumbled, sending a torrent of sand and soil tumbling down toward them. Although they could see the future, both chose to accept this moment and embrace the fate they had envisioned countless times. Or perhaps, it was simply destiny? Chapter 57, Greetings from 500 years ago. Under the grey sky, a light drizzle moistened the town nestled below the snowfield, a town Ash himself had once built. Thanks to the silver mines in the snowfield, the town had grown increasingly prosperous. Yet, on this rainy day, the residents hurried about with an air of melancholy, evoking memories of the town's early days some 500 years ago. Walking along the town's most ancient street, Ash took in the familiar sights, scenes that vividly brought back memories. But, he didn't feel any desire to linger here. The events that had happened in this place seemed insignificant now. The only thing he truly remembered was that this was where he'd met his friend Kathy for the first time. Ash had always had few friends, and now only Frieren remained, and he wasn't even sure if the elf Millie was still alive. Life is so unpredictable. It probably was always going to end up like this, but would you have still chosen to die together if you'd foreseen it? His friend's passing left him with a profound, indescribable sorrow. This feeling had unconsciously drawn him back to this familiar street before he would go to rejoin the brave team, much like the pull people feel to return to their hometown. And to him, in a sense, this town felt like the village he'd once had, a place he could almost call home. Though, maybe the old friends he once had here no longer existed. Even so, there's nothing here that interests me now. Sigh. Come to think of it, even if I'm stronger than before and capable of more, what's the point in becoming the Demon King in the future? Ash didn't have much ambition for power. Rather than the sense of accomplishment from a high position, he preferred a carefree, leisurely life. His greatest wish was simply to protect those he cared about, but, old friends were like leaves in the wind, forever drifting away. By now, it felt as if there was nothing left to lose. He could go out and make new friends, but, the demons were too peculiar, and humans, they perished far too quickly. But I think I finally understand what Kathy meant back then. Ash muttered to himself as he looked up at the grey sky, though he could no longer recall what his first friend even looked like. 500 years had passed for the world, though it felt like only a few decades to him. Just as he was about to leave, the faint melancholy urging him to never return, a nearby window suddenly opened. "You? Could you be Ash?" "Hey." The unfamiliar voice made him turn his head, puzzled. The speaker was a boy he'd never seen before. Yet, strangely, the boy looked even more shocked than Ash did at the mention of his own name. "What? You? No, you're really Mr. Ash." "That's right, my name is Ash." "And you are?" Ash looked at the hesitant boy, frowning slightly. The boy's expression was nothing like that of Frank or Schlacht, those who had mastered the magic of seeing the future. But, if that were not the case, then this was indeed a bit of a mystery. "Oh, I'm Anderson. My mother is..." The flustered boy blurted out all his family's names, but when he noticed Ash still seemed baffled, he nervously invited him inside. Anderson led Ash into the living room, then headed to his parents' room. After searching carefully, he found an intricately carved wooden box hidden deep within the closet. The wooden box was clearly enchanted with protective magic, with its magic stone regularly replaced. It had also been treated to resist corrosion, and its materials were of the finest quality. Inside the box lay a palm-sized magical artifact. When opened, it revealed his portrait, or rather, a magically preserved image of him, dressed in a military uniform. It was unmistakably taken 500 years ago. The artifact housing the image showed signs of frequent repair, bearing the unmistakable aura of centuries gone by. Could this be something left by Kathy? No, that can't be. The familiar image tugged at memories of the past, recalling when the portrait was first made. But now, Ash found himself questioning if he was under some sort of mental enchantment. After all, 500 years had passed, countless generations had come and gone for humanity. Seeing Ash's disbelief, Anderson grew even more excited. Are you really Mr. Ash? You actually exist? No way, this. I don't know. I don't know anything more, but my grandma told me to do this. She said if I ever met the person in the picture, I must greet him. And then? Anderson thought hard, then looked directly into Ash's eyes and spoke slowly. We will meet again. Even if it isn't me, as long as my bloodline continues, someone will remember your existence. That's what I'm supposed to tell you. What does that even mean? I'm not sure either, but that's what it says here, and it's exactly what my grandma instructed. Anderson lifted the red cloth under the artifact, revealing the very words etched beneath. For a moment, Ash was at a loss for words, feeling reminded of his old adjutant from his days as a general. As he traced a finger over the box, he shook his head slightly, saying, "You actually did something like this. But what's the point? By the way, how have you kept this box so well preserved until now?" Well, actually, my dad and grandma told me that if I ever faced a problem I couldn't solve, I should find the person in the picture, and he would help us somehow. So, we made sure to take good care of it over the years. So, you all think of me as some kind of failsafe against disaster. Anderson confessed this truthfully, leaving Ash somewhere between laughter and exasperation. Yet, he couldn't help but feel a deep nostalgia, as if recalling that final moment before their parting. Although he had intended to leave right away, he was invited to stay at the boys' house for the night, where he was warmly welcomed by Anderson's family. According to Anderson's father, Kathy had once hinted that Ash might one day be magically preserved, allowing future generations to encounter him, a powerful mage. It seemed she had ultimately chosen to settle here, perhaps hoping he would return. Ash found this notion troublesome, but he chose not to refute it. After staying for a short while and leaving behind some funds for future upkeep of Kathy's resting place, he said a temporary farewell to her descendants. Yet, as he looked back and saw Anderson and his family waving to him from afar, he couldn't shake the feeling that he might somehow meet them again. Though it would likely be with their descendants. Chapter 58, 500 years later, another wish on a shooting star. The adventures of Frieren and her companions continued, and when they reunited with Ash, they noticed his lingering sadness. Rather than sharing in his quiet reflection on past losses, the expressions of the team members grew increasingly serious. What's wrong? Frieren noticed his somber mood, so different from his usual demeanor, and couldn't help feeling concerned. Did you hear about it too? The news of the Southern hero's death. Yet. He looked off into the distance, sighing as if lost in thought. Life is truly unpredictable. It really is. Frieren observed his slightly sorrowful figure and felt a sudden urge to talk to him more, realizing that they'd always had a close connection. Feeling an unexpected annoyance at this thought, she gently patted his shoulder. My condolences. It's surprising to hear you say that. Oh really, who do you take me for? Frieren's voice held a hint of irritation. Haha, sorry. Just kidding. He chuckled, reaching over to ruffle her hair. Of course, she quickly swatted his hand away, fixing her hair with a look of mild annoyance. How many times do I have to tell you not to touch my head? I'll remember next time. I can't believe you. Because all I'm doing is trying to remember. No wonder you're a wall-climbing scoundrel who never learns from his mistakes. Isn't it a little harsh to call me that? I haven't done anything untoward. Without missing a beat, he lightly tapped her on the head before she could protest and swiftly moved away, settling down beside the fire. Nearby, the dwarf warrior Eisen had an unusually serious look on his face. Ash, you've heard, haven't you? About the Southern hero. That guy, the strongest of us all, and now he's gone. Do we honestly have any hope? Don't say that, Eisen. Hater, the wine-loving priest known for lifting everyone's spirits, had a faint tremor in his hand as he poured himself a drink. But with his usual resilience, he tried to cheer them up, raising his voice with a somewhat forced smile. Sure, he's gone, which is a tragedy, but he took down 4 great demons. He left behind accomplishments beyond anything we could have imagined. And because of him, people like us now have a chance to defeat the Demon King, right? But is there really anyone else who could match his strength? The death of the southern hero had sent shockwaves through the entire human world. Even Eisen, usually steady as a rock, felt like he'd lost his foundation. His hands, hidden under his cloak, were shaking slightly, just like Hader's. He felt a gnawing uncertainty about their ability to face such an overwhelming enemy. Sensing the growing unease, Hader glanced over at Ash, hoping to lighten the somber atmosphere. Hey, isn't it about time you officially joined us, Ash? If you're with us when it really counts, I think we'll all feel a lot better. Saving the world's not my thing, Ash replied, smiling as he waved his hand dismissively. Eisen sighed, not the least bit surprised. Give it up, Hader. If he were the world-saving type, he wouldn't be wasting his time hanging around with us. Even if Eisen is impatient, maybe it's not such a bad idea to pick up the pace in light of what's happening, Frieren said, her expression tinged with worry. She'd never been one to fret over time, but the southern hero's death left her uneasy about their own progress. Still, even though they all shared the same thought, it didn't change their journey's course. In the first year of their travels, despite encountering such devastating news, their pace did not noticeably increase. After all, it wasn't just Himmel who preferred a slower pace. Frieren had set out on this journey partly because she thought she'd never see Ash again and wanted to try understanding humans. However, as unreliable as the group might have seemed, Ash himself would always disappear for months at critical times. So, he had no room to criticize their lack of urgency. 10 years flew by, and, unexpectedly, this somewhat shaky team managed to defeat the Demon King. But Ash had no idea how it happened. Around 2 months before the decisive battle, he'd been summoned by an unknown great demon named Solitar who had been arranged by Schlacht, to lift the seal of the corrupt sage, Qual. He'd taken Aura with him for the task, only to return once it was all over. In the capital city of the kingdom where they had first set out, a grand triumphal parade was held to celebrate the victory of the brave team over the Demon King. As the people of the royal capital lined the streets, cheering with flowers in hand, Ash casually blended into the crowd, enjoying the free drinks without drawing attention to himself. But, hey! Before he could even take a sip to celebrate, the silver-haired elf, Frieren who hadn't aged a day stormed over, slamming her hands on the table and nearly causing his wine glass to topple. What? He asked, startled, looking up at her. What's wrong? It's a rare moment of celebration, but you look so serious. You ran off in the middle of the battle, and now you're here eating and drinking for free. I'm old, and my body isn't as agile as it used to be. There was really nothing I could do, he replied, coming up with an excuse. Frieren's fierce demeanor faltered, and her expression softened slightly, a hint of awkwardness appearing. Is that so? You, forget it. Not wanting to bring up the sensitive topic of age, he quickly changed the subject and smiled. By the way, congratulations. You've successfully defeated the Demon King and become heroes. Everyone's celebrating you. I heard they're even planning to make a statue in your honor. Humans are so fickle. They were reluctant to give us even 10 copper coins when we set out, but now they're being generous. Well, isn't it nice to enjoy free drinks? Hader, who had obviously had more than a few, plopped down across from Ash, holding a beer with a flushed face. Exactly. Anyway, the result was good, so isn't that enough? Himmel chimed in, also sitting down next to Ash with a drink in hand. However, Ash couldn't help but notice that Eisen, a dwarf, was eating bread but hadn't touched any alcohol, prompting him to ask, I've been meaning to ask this, you're a dwarf. Why don't you drink? How many stereotypes do you have about dwarves? Eisen, who had been silent until now, looked up and glanced at his companion, who was on the verge of getting drunk, while chewing on a piece of bread. Hader is a priest, but he loves to drink. Isn't that stranger? True. The longer you live, the more unusual things you come across. Isn't that something an old man would say? Hader laughed, throwing an arm around Ash's shoulders. Yeah, let's think about something cheerful, Ash replied indifferently. Just then, Frieren tapped him on the back of the head and pointed to the sky. Ash, look! There's a half-century meteor tonight. Following the elf girl's gesture, Ash looked up to see the vast night sky, where countless points of light began shifting from deep blue to a distant purple, piercing the quiet darkness as the festivities wound down. Oh, it's so beautiful! But I feel like I've seen this before. He widened his eyes in awe, then rubbed his chin thoughtfully, a nostalgic smile spreading across his face. Ah! I remember now. I saw it when I was a kid. To this day, he clearly recalls that night, sitting with Aura at the entrance of a cave, entranced by the breathtaking meteor shower. He had made a wish then: when I grow up, I'll never watch shooting stars with Aura again. Now that wish had been fulfilled, yet hadn't. After all, the people watching the meteors with him now were quite an odd bunch. The drunk priest still had his arm draped around Ash's shoulder, making it feel less like a romantic night under the fireworks and more like watching them with good friends. The night sky was beautiful, but his heart felt cold. I don't wish for a beautiful girl anymore. Please, at least let me watch shooting stars with someone serious next time. As the meteors filled the sky, Ash gently shrugged off Hader's hand and suddenly remembered the rumor that wishes made on shooting stars are highly effective. After 500 years, he couldn't resist, making a wish upon the stars once more. T/N, I saw a lot of comments hating this fic because it introduced two OC characters named Frank and Schlacht. The funny thing is they aren't even Ox. Frank is the hero of South, his name was Frank because the Frieren series didn't mention his real name, and Schlacht is Demon King's confidant. Like, even if you haven't read the manga you just had to Google it. Like hating for no reason. Chapter 59, Farewell and 1000 Years Later, See You Again, Seria. As the celebration was coming to an end, the group quietly looked up at the sky, now filled with shooting stars. In that peaceful silence, Ash's whispered wish reached Frieren and Hader, who were seated beside him. The two exchanged a glance, feeling an inexplicable warmth, and gently placed their hands on his shoulders. Instead of worrying, let's just watch the shooting stars, Hader murmured, his voice warm and softened by alcohol. Frieren, sounding unusually gentle, added, yes, don't dwell on strange thoughts. After all, you still have me as your big sister, don't you? You two are just weirdos, he muttered, visibly annoyed by their pity. Oh, forget it. I'm too lazy to talk to you, he sighed, feeling that arguing with them was a waste of time with such eccentric friends. He turned around as if to say something, hesitated, and finally let out a resigned sigh. What is it? If you're troubled, you can tell me. I am a priest, after all, Hader offered, taking another sip of his drink. If I were looking for someone to confide in, it'd be a real priest, not an uncle like you. How rude, Hader replied, his smile freezing for a moment. Frieren followed up coolly, but it's true, uncle. So, you're both being rude? Speaking of which, I can't help but feel envious of Ash's magic. He hasn't aged at all in all this time, it's like a cheat. By now, the members of the Brave team understood why Ash hadn't aged, and Hader, while feeling envious, couldn't help but chuckle about it. Frieren, on the other hand, shrugged. It's only been 10 years. Humans age much too quickly. Only 10 years. Himmel repeated, sadness briefly crossing his face. But he shook it off, looked up at the sky, and smiled. A meteor shower that appears only once every 50 years, it's the perfect way to begin a peaceful era. To be honest, it's hard to really see it in the city, Frieren remarked bluntly. Ash shrugged and said, make do. Don't be so particular. When I'm with all of you, if it were too beautiful, I'd just feel more melancholic. You two really don't care about the atmosphere at all, Himmel sighed, looking exasperated. What kind of twisted understanding is this? Not that I want it, it just makes me look strange. I've been meaning to say you have no right to call us weird, you know, he replied, prompting Frieren to narrow her eyes in mild irritation. Everyone else felt an urge to say, you two are both strange. But this was the end of their journey, so it might be best to avoid any cutting remarks. Ash, sensing the mood, reached out and placed his hand on Frieren's head, pressing gently so she lowered her voice. This is probably our last gathering. I'm just a passerby, so it's fine for me. But you're a proper member, so do try to be mindful of the atmosphere, although, this meteor shower as a parting ceremony is a bit disappointing. Disappointing? Frieren paused and then, hesitantly, said. I know a place where the night sky is breathtaking. If there's still a chance, 50 years from now, I'll take you there. How about that? 50 years from now. What's wrong? Is there a chance? Ash looked around, a trace of loneliness in his eyes. Aside from the dwarves and the elves, no one could say for certain if the remaining two would even live to see 50 years pass. But Frieren lowered her head sadly. Her worries differed from Ash's. She truly doubted he would live to see that time. The atmosphere that followed gradually became more somber without anyone noticing, not to mention Frieren's overly lengthy agreement, but now, they were truly about to part ways. The adventure was over, and everyone needed to go their separate ways. Because they no longer had a reason to stay together, and each of them had their own lives to live. This world is extremely stingy toward heroes. Even if they save the world, countries won't grant them noble status or anything of the sort. Don't even dream of a huge bounty. The best they can expect is a statue as a sign of respect, and the thought of marrying a princess is a mere fantasy. When Himmel returned, he was already worrying about what kind of job he might find in the capital, while Hader's goal was simple: he wanted a job that allowed him to drink freely. Only Eisen said nothing. Amid this slightly sad atmosphere of each going their separate ways, the celebratory banquet gradually came to an end. The next day, in the forest outside the royal capital, near the stone arch bridge. The forest in the early morning was lightly veiled by a layer of mist. Sunlight filtered through the treetops, casting soft, dappled light over the group gathered there. As the moment of separation finally arrived, Frieren looked at Ash, the only one who hadn't mentioned his destination. I plan to continue collecting magic as before and travel around the central kingdoms for the next 100 years. What about you? Frieren asked. Me? As for me, why don't I go and have a look at the southern countries? Really? Then I'll leave first. Frieren nodded slightly and stepped onto the arch bridge. But she took only a couple of steps before turning back and saying, I'll come back occasionally. Himmel, Hader, Eisen, will you all be around later? No one said anything, they just smiled, nodded, and waved to see her off. But before crossing the stone bridge completely, she turned back again to look at Ash, saying, 50 years from now will you still be here? Life is always full of surprises. Who can be certain of the future that hasn't yet arrived? He smiled helplessly, walking in the opposite direction ahead of Frieren, waving without looking back. Anyway, I'll go first. If fate allows, we'll meet again. A faint sense of reluctance and anticipation filled the air, while the winding path before him was lined with flowers and green grass on both sides, as if nature had created its own tapestry. The breeze blew gently, carrying a barely noticeable hint of coolness. This was perfect weather to set out on a journey again. Frieren stood there, watching him for a while, then nodded to her remaining teammates, turned, and left this time, without looking back. Really, I still can't understand those two, even now, Himmel said with a slight smile, waving his hand, his voice filled with a trace of regret. Hader smiled helplessly, slowly steadying his trembling hands. Yeah, I don't know how long Frieren has lived, or where Ash is from, but if he doesn't drink too much maybe we'll see each other again in 50 years. Frieren and Ash even said they'd come back occasionally. Ash, maybe. But don't expect too much from Frieren. Elves occasionally and even dwarves' sense of time don't exactly align with ours. Eisen's rough voice held an indiscernible tone at the end, hinting at his mood but never fully revealing it. As the two figures disappeared into the distance, a faint sadness seemed to settle in the air, surrounding the remaining three. Perhaps, they might never meet again. Such thoughts couldn't help but arise in each of their minds. But in this era, it was a reality that was all too common. Though it brought a sense of regret, there was nothing to be done about it. After saying his goodbyes, Ash soared into the clouds with the cool morning breeze. The direction he chose was entirely opposite to what he'd told everyone. He flew resolutely north. He threw himself into the future he envisioned, studying magic with the corrupt sage of the manipulated kingdom and gathering demons in preparation for what lay ahead. The years of seclusion and practice went by as quickly as the snap of a finger. About 20 years passed like a blink, when he suddenly took note of an unusual organization emerging in the world: the Continental Magic Association. The headquarters was in the Holy City, and a branch had been set up in the second largest city in the kingdom, the magic city of Oberst. Recently, as the organization sought more land to expand, the local lord under his influence was left undecided and had brought him the application form, which now sat on his desk. I heard it was founded by an elf? Or could it be Seria? No, it must be an impostor. Looking at the application form, he couldn't help but wonder, recalling rumors that the founder was Seria. He pondered if it was his friend Millie from the elven village, or perhaps some other elf using Seria's name. He remembered that Millie, though skilled in plant magic primarily for brewing wine, had possessed formidable abilities even thousands of years ago. Yet, Millie had always shown a lack of interest in humans or the outside world, so it seemed unlikely. And as for Seria, that was even more improbable. According to Frieren, Flam had once requested Seria step forward to teach humans. But Seria, back then, had instantly torn up the request in disdain, scattering her disciples' wish into pieces 1,000 years ago. Why would she suddenly emerge now? It couldn't be Frieren either. She and Seria were not on friendly terms, so it was unlikely she would use Seria's name. And, knowing Frieren's nature, she wasn't the type to establish a school in her name. With curiosity brewing and a slight eagerness to confront any impersonators, he decided to make a visit to the Magic City himself. He wanted to see firsthand who exactly was behind the founding of the Continental Magic Association. However, bearing the title of a nominal earl, he strode into the Magic Association's reception hall as if he owned the place and kicked the door open without hesitation. Bang! The heavy double doors, already crooked, burst open further. Let's see who's behind all this, eh? Is it actually the real Seria? Before he could finish his words, his expression froze in an instant. Chapter 60, The Master and Disciple in True Heart Exchange. _________. In Seria's private reception room at the Continental Magic Association branch, a routine meeting was underway. But the meeting was only halfway through when the door to the reception room was kicked open. When everyone looked over, the newcomer had an arrogant expression as if he was prepared to challenge someone, but he suddenly froze, unable to finish his words. Because the moment the door was kicked open, Ash saw, from afar, a small figure sitting untidily on the large wooden chair at the end of the room. It was clearly Seria herself. Hey! Seria, who had also been startled by the loud noise of the door crashing open, raised her eyes and noticed Ash's expression gradually stiffening. The corners of her mouth curled up, revealing a wide grin. Hey! Sorry, wrong room. Ash quickly apologized, stepping forward in a flash to pick up the damaged door handle and reassemble it carefully. After finishing all of this in one swift motion, he managed an awkward but polite smile, nodded at everyone in the room, and said, "Please, continue. Don't mind me." With those words, and while everyone in the room was still in a daze, he closed the broken door once more. But just as he turned around, breathed a sigh of relief, and wiped the cold sweat from his forehead, ready to leave quickly. "Where do you think you are going, my dear disciple?" Someone pressed down firmly on his shoulder, and a familiar voice sounded very close behind him. "Teleportation? That's a bit unnerving." Ash sighed, patting his face as he tried to calm himself down. Then, he slowly turned around, wearing a smile as if meeting her for the first time, and looked at the petite figure floating slightly above the ground. With a hint of forced surprise, he said, "Oh! Isn't this my esteemed master, Seria? How long has it been? 1,000 years, right? I never imagined I'd see you here. What a truly fortuitous encounter." Tisk, still pretending, Seria clicked her tongue shamelessly. "Do you think that if you act as though you're seeing me for the first time, I'll let you off as if nothing happened?" "Let me off? What are you talking about? Don't we have a special bond?" He tried, attempting to tap into their past connection, hoping to strike a chord. But Seria dismissed him coldly. "A bond? We haven't seen each other for 1,000 years. What bond could there be?" Ha, ha ha, those words really sting, don't they? I missed you terribly, every day. No news for 1,000 years. Is that really what you care about? This doesn't seem like you." "Indeed," Seria nodded thoughtfully, which made him smile with a sliver of hope. "Well, to celebrate our reunion as master and disciple, why don't we? Don't be too pleased with yourself. Since you're here, I trust you've come prepared." "Prepared for what exactly?" "Let's see the progress you've made over the past 1,000 years, and then we can talk about your compensation." "Compensation? For the door? I don't wait." With a stiff smile, he tried to continue, but as he saw the magical energy gathering in Seria's hands, he felt a sudden, cold sweat run down his back. A terrifying smile appeared on the face of the ancient elf at that moment, and then, boom! An explosion erupted in the building of the Magic Association. Ash's figure darted through the flames, not to fight, but to escape. After all, as long as the Green Mountains remain, there's no fear of running out of firewood. But the explosions continued one after another, showing no sign of stopping. Don't let anyone get hurt, okay? Otherwise, let's just keep going. As the warning reached his ears, the entire building was destroyed in the blink of an eye, with even the outer walls collapsing. The barriers set up around it offered no resistance, succumbing easily to the terrifying energy. However, when everything finally calmed down, the scene was strangely shocking. Even if we overlook the smoke and dust, the flames that shot into the sky nearly flew over 100 meters high. The energy impact should have turned everything within hundreds of meters into ruins, creating a horrific massacre. But in reality, only the magic association was damaged, and the area outside remained unaffected. As an authoritative organization that had gained fame across the continent in a short period, it seemed almost impossible for such a devastating attack to occur within the Continental Magic Association. However, the impossible had happened, and no one even stood up to prevent this tragedy. No, those who would truly have the courage to intervene would probably end up as pieces of meat flying through the air in the next moment. Usually, the building was filled with staff members, yet the actual number of deaths was 0. And the only person injured was one. Covered in dust and blood, looking extremely disheveled, Ash was the only casualty in this incident. What have I done to deserve coming to this damn place for no reason? He muttered, lifting the wall behind him. He felt that this level of violence was borderline abuse. He turned around to face the elf who was leisurely walking toward him, and complained. What on earth are you doing? There has to be a limit to everything, okay? If it weren't for me, someone would have died. No one died, right? And I did hold back, so let's consider this a test for you. Is your magic association finished? It's okay. Isn't it time for you to pay compensation? Wait a minute. I only broke a door, right? He looked at the magic association, now in ruins, and an ominous premonition rose in his mind. He eyed the girl standing before him warily. You're not thinking of... That's it. Seria's smile was so bright it nearly made him curse. No, I. It was going to be demolished and expanded anyway, and now that you're here, there's someone to pay for it. But... how about my position? Before he could refuse, Seria threw out a great temptation. Although this organization was established not long ago, it's considered a good one among human organizations. What do you think? This is my compensation for accidentally injuring you. If it were anyone else, I wouldn't give away my hard work so freely. No, wait a minute, let me sort this out first. After enduring another round of Seria's unexpected attacks, Ash found himself thrown off by the sudden shift to kindness. With a hand on his forehead, he sat quietly, deep in thought. Finally, he looked up, still cautious, and voiced his suspicions. First, you suddenly hit me, and now you're offering all these benefits. Something doesn't add up. Think about it, Seria replied with a charming smile, hands spread wide, her tone suddenly gentle and persuasive. If I just hand you authority, no one under me will accept it. But if you step up and show your strength, especially by saving them, they'll respect you. I'm paving the way for you. This is the true master-disciple relationship you've always talked about, isn't it? I'm passing the organization I built to you. That doesn't sound right. You're just tired of managing all of this, aren't you? So you took out your frustration on me and then pushed all your hard work onto me, calling it an inheritance. Wiping blood and dust from his face, Ash sighed with exasperation, then glanced at her, utterly baffled. You clearly despise all these annoying responsibilities. So why come out here yourself? Is this to honor some disciple's last wish from 1,000 years ago? Since when did you become so thoughtful? Ha, only you dare to talk nonsense to me like that, Seria laughed, shaking her head, a hint of amusement dancing in her eyes. Nonsense? Really? And yet, Oh. Seria's smile turned icy, a fierce gleam in her eyes that made him stop mid-sentence and swallow his words. Actually, I just remembered something urgent I need to do back home. So, can I take my leave for today? Ash, who had been feigning injury on the ground, suddenly straightened up, patting himself off as if to casually slip away. Surprisingly, Seria didn't try to stop him. But as he neared a broken section of the wall, he suddenly saw her standing there, arms crossed, her gaze fixed on him. Startled, he instinctively took 2 steps back. Are you a ghost? How do you keep appearing out of nowhere? What's the rush? We haven't seen each other in so long, and now you're running off already? That's not very reasonable, is it? Actually, I was planning to go into town to buy some gifts, you know, as a gesture. Since it's been so long, a bit of courtesy seems appropriate, right? I don't care. Well, I do. Nonsense. Actually, I think I lost too much blood. Feeling a bit lightheaded now. I'm not sure I can even stand straight. Dramatically, Ash staggered, collapsing onto the ground once more, covering his head and feigning severe weakness. Seria. I really don't think I can keep this up. Maybe I should rest a bit first, and then we can talk about everything. Oh, so you really can't hold out? Yes. After all, you beat me up so badly. Not that I'm blaming you for it, of course. You're my master, right? Spare me the emotional nonsense. Seria interrupted sharply, eyeing him with a cold laugh as she pointed out, and isn't that blood mostly just chicken blood? That you smear it on yourself when I wasn't looking. Chapter 61, Who is More Evil? Half a century has come in the blink of an eye. It wasn't at the moment of being attacked, but when he encountered Seria that Ash had a premonition he was in big trouble. Under the cover of the explosion and smoke, he dashed into the kitchen without a word, smearing some blood on himself to make his injuries appear worse in hopes of gaining some sympathy. However, tisk did she actually see through it. Even though his act had been exposed, he wasn't embarrassed in the slightest after all, the other party was this cunning individual. Smacking his lips, he muttered, the old ones really are the wisest. That saying makes so much sense. You don't have to resist so much. I won't force you, Seria tried to persuade him with a gentle tone, attempting to appeal to his better nature. But then I refuse. Without a moment's hesitation, he declined bluntly and unapologetically. Seria's expression, which had softened a bit, immediately grew cold again. What do you mean by that? Rejecting me so quickly, are you not even going to give me the slightest respect? Well. After a brief pause, he looked around, then took out a scrap of paper and a pen from the rubble, scribbling a series of words before handing it over respectfully. What's this? Seria took the paper, frowning after only a quick glance. The note read. As I take up my pen, my heart is filled with gratitude and admiration. Since I began learning magic, I have been deeply grateful for Master's careful guidance. Not only have you taught me all you know about magic, but you have also given me endless inspiration on how to live with honor. Your wisdom, patience, and noble character are like a beacon illuminating my path forward. I am beyond words in expressing my gratitude for all your efforts. Yet, after careful reflection, when I face the precious legacy you wish to pass to me, my heart is filled with complex emotions and inner struggles. The entire note was basically flattery loaded with flowery and insincere clichés that made Seria's head throb. She glanced between the letter and his overly polite smile, her mouth twisting with irritation. In the next instant, she tore the note into pieces, threw it to the ground, and snapped, "What have you been doing these past 1,000 years? Learning aristocratic nonsense? Spare me this rubbish and just say it to my face. Then I refuse." You. Seria's face darkened dangerously. Sensing he might have pushed too far, Ash quickly rose, crouched down in front of her, and placed his hands gently on her shoulders, his expression suddenly solemn. Actually, we can talk this out peacefully. Or, maybe take a moment to calm down first. Oh? I'm listening. What else do you have to say? Well, isn't it obvious? He glanced at her. What's the point of all this? What do you mean? Of course, I refused. Why should I take over this mess? That farewell note wasn't meant for me, right? Facing Seria's warning glare, he went on, almost lecturing her. Look, I'm not saying anything against you personally, but just handing over Flam's legacy to someone else isn't wise. If things go south, her spirit. I've already tested your strength, Seria interrupted. An ordinary first-level magician would have been finished by now. This isn't a casual matter. You have potential, trust yourself. Aren't you afraid I might still fail? He asked, then, as if he didn't care to hear her response, sighed and continued, let's set this aside for now. Honestly, I have my own matters to attend to. There's really no way I can take this on. Then tell me, what exactly are you planning to do? Seria had been reluctant to go out and personally build up a force, so she had delayed fulfilling Flam's will for just a little while. Now that she saw Ash as a prime candidate for free labor, she naturally had no intention of letting him slip away so easily. But since he seemed so unwilling, she softened her stance slightly. She didn't intend to force him, but her gaze urged him to explain himself. Yet, without a solid reason, it was clear she wasn't going to let him off the hook. Ash admitted he'd taken control of the kingdom and planned to manage it to build strength, but Seria's reaction was ambiguous, a mix of agreement and reluctance. While she didn't seem intent on pushing him further, her expectations lingered. "You've really come a long way, haven't you? You're in control of an entire kingdom now." Seria lounged on a wooden chair amid the ruins, crossing her legs with a mischievous smile. "Then the reconstruction and expansion here can be entirely your responsibility. Show me how much you value your teacher. That's the people's hard-earned money. I'm not about to bleed the civilians dry." "Civilians?" Seria scoffed. "How much money do you think they have? Why not ask the nobles to contribute? You've got plenty of them under your thumb, right? This place will belong to you eventually, so why not improve it? But I don't even want to take over this mess in the first place. This is just..." "I won't force you," Seria said, though her tone carried a weight that made him sigh. "Honestly, you really are a devil." "Oh, coming from a demon who manipulates others," Seria retorted with a smirk, leaving him momentarily speechless. In terms of behavior and reputation, it was hard to deny that he might seem even more devilish. In the end, Ash, who'd come only to deal with a few lingering issues, found himself in a bind. He was effectively roped into staying in the magical city to help organize the establishment of a branch of the Continental Magic Association. Those he'd saved within the Magic Association began to view him as Seria's future successor and the branch leader, or even as a very generous noble patron. Along with his titles, he also gained access to Seria's extensive collection of magical books. Faced with the chance to read all the magical knowledge in the world, money suddenly seemed a lot less valuable. Years slipped by as he continued his studies and managed responsibilities under Seria's watchful eye. Ash even took over the Demon King's castle, which had been abandoned, but in just the first year of his rule he faced a formidable challenger, the bloody god of war, Rival, one of the most ancient and powerful demons in existence. What a great successor! No wonder they dared to take over this place. The demon warrior, Rival with slicked back hair, prominent horns, and thick eyebrows laughed with genuine excitement when he saw Ash. Channeling his magic power into a colossal sword, he swung it down at Ash without a word. Bang! The massive sword clashed with Ash's own long sword, sending sparks flying. Ash, thrown backward by the impact, skidded at a frightening speed. Yet, in the midst of his uncontrolled retreat, he managed to plant a firm step forward, stabilizing himself just in time. Behind him, the force of the collision had torn up the ground, creating a dramatic, inverted waterfall of earth and stone. Rival's grin widened with approval. Laughing heartily, he called out, "Not bad. You've got some real grit. That dwarf, Eisen, couldn't even stand his ground after one punch from me, but you, after taking a blow from my sword, you're still in control." "I've heard of you," Ash muttered, visibly frustrated. Rival, who seemed to live for combat, looked at Ash with eyes ablaze with anticipation. "Come on, young man. Defeat me in a show of strength, and I, this old warrior, will recognize you as the new Demon King." "Wait. Are you serious? I'm a magician. You, a warrior, want me to fight you in hand-to-hand combat?" Ash looked at Rival, completely taken aback. He couldn't fathom how Rival could make such a demand. "A magician? You seem more like a warrior to me. Besides, no ordinary magician could have blocked my sword. My specialty is magic. I just know a bit of martial arts, that's all," Ash replied, scratching his head. "How about this? Why don't you teach me how to fight? Then I'll get better, and you'll have a real challenge." Sounds like a plan." Rival didn't hesitate long before nodding with delight, muttering to himself as if he'd found a brilliant idea. "Personally train an outstanding junior, then have them surpass me in every way, that sounds perfect." I only suggested it, but you actually agreed?" Ash asked, incredulous. "Why search the world for rivals when I can train one right here? And frankly, I can't think of anyone more suited for this than you. Even if you call yourself a magician, that power you wield, no ordinary human could dream of such strength." Rival sized him up, then lifted his sword once more, his smile growing ever more bloodthirsty. Come on, let me teach you. Wait, this doesn't seem like teaching. The fastest way to learn is in real combat. Rival's giant sword came down with immense power. Ash could only smile wryly, unsure what expression to wear. All he could do was grit his teeth and dive into the fight. Thus began the days that followed. Ash found himself studying magic under Seria's strict guidance while training as a warrior under Rival's brutal regimen. With such a relentless schedule, time slipped by quickly. In the blink of an eye, the 50-year agreement loomed ever closer. One evening, while taking a rare break, Ash sat atop the wall of the Demon King's castle, gazing at the distant night sky. He thought of the appointment he'd made half a century ago. His heart felt heavy, unsure if he should fulfill that promise. After all, there were fewer friends now. And this time, he might be nearing the limits of human lifespan. Chapter 62, Reunion with an Old Friend. If someone else ended up dying during a date, Ash would be thoroughly depressed. But skipping out didn't feel right either, after all, this was an arrangement with a friend. So, he sighed as he sat on the city wall, feeling endlessly conflicted, unable to make up his mind. Just then, Rival appeared beside him without a sound, and before Ash could react. What? You've pushed your martial arts to the very pinnacle of human ability. One more step, and you'd be on par with me. Yet here you are, with that unwarrior-like expression. Rival slapped him on the back without a hint of restraint, the impact resounding with a loud bang and nearly sending Ash tumbling off the wall. Ash shot the old man a frustrated look, but Rival only grinned back, leaving him at a loss for words. For a moment, Ash couldn't help but think that these powerful demons didn't seem quite like demons at all. Aura, he could understand, given that he'd essentially raised them, it was natural for them to be a little unusual. But Rival? He lacked any fear of death and had an unyielding passion for battle and attitude that defied demon instincts. Yes, Rival had absolutely no fear in battle. This was something the dwarf warrior Aizen, who had once fought him, could attest to. It was said that Rival's strength had reached a level of martial prowess that humans couldn't hope to achieve. Even though Rival had used an axe to fight Aizen, he was still far beyond the pinnacle that Aizen had reached. Although Ash hadn't witnessed their fight, he'd heard from his companions that Rival's skill was terrifying, even outmatching Aizen's. His martial arts abilities were beyond anything a human could comprehend. Aizen's special moves had only scratched Rival's face, and his regular attacks hadn't harmed him at all. His body was astoundingly durable, harder even than that of a dragon. However, his single-minded focus on fighting and lack of fear had allowed Aizen to seize an opportunity, knocking him off a cliff with a special attack, and even managing to cut his face. But that was the extent of it, nothing else could harm him. His strength was simply monstrous. Of course, none of this was particularly relevant to the situation now, but it made him quite suited to be a teacher. As for his appearance, he was just a quirky uncle with slicked back hair, standing over 2 meters tall, always smiling. So Ash just turned to look at him. When Rival gazed back with a curious look, Ash was convinced if he ever went to watch meteors with Frieren and the others again, it definitely wouldn't be with this strange uncle at this castle. As for Seria, he figured he could skip that too. And Aura, well, that was just a shadow of the past. Watching meteors with Seria or Aura isn't all that different from watching with Rival. Meteors? Also, the 50-year meteor shower is about to happen again, isn't it? Do you want to watch meteors with me? Rival asked, his curiosity piqued as he overheard his name. To Rival, it didn't seem like much, but... Ash's expression turned to one of pure resistance. No, the very thought is disturbing, so let's not. Why not? 2 grown men, sitting side by side, in the middle of the night, watching shooting stars. Can't you imagine how odd that would look? Why, it's the friendship of warriors. Rival replied without hesitation, leaving Ash speechless. After a long silence, Ash held his forehead with one hand and sighed, "All right, I admit it, I'm a bit old-fashioned. Please forgive me." "Ah. You're forgiven. So let's fight again. This time, I'll only use one hand. No weapons, and I won't even go full strength." "Hey? What are you talking about? I was thinking whoa." Before Ash could finish, Rival's fist practically the size of a casserole pot smashed into his face without a shred of mercy. Caught completely off guard, he took the full brunt of the punch, his body flung from the wall like a cannonball, landing heavily on the ground. Not surprisingly, all his troubles vanished under that crushing blow. Though helpless against a berserker-like rival, Ash resolved through this brutal exchange that he would witness the final moments of his old friend. So, the very next day, with a face bruised and body battered, he flew straight to the Central Kingdoms at full speed. There was simply no other option. Healing magic was a privilege of the goddess, available only to those who possessed the holy scriptures, primarily priest. Unfortunately, as a demon, even holding the scriptures wouldn't grant him access to healing. The goddess had clearly shown her disdain, unwilling to extend even a trace of favor to him. Returning to the capital after half a century felt like a lifetime for Ash, still a young demon. New buildings had sprung up, and the streets had changed slightly, but 50 years wasn't enough to bring drastic transformations to a city of this era. He tried to recall the direction to Himmel's home. Wait, I don't remember any of it. He'd only been to Himmel's home once, 50 years ago, so his memory was hazy, leaving him wandering through the city's maze of streets and alleys. On top of that, a barrier in the capital prohibited flight, making his situation even more frustrating. He even considered casting some magic into the sky to catch someone's attention, hoping an acquaintance might notice him. Ash? Is that you? An unfamiliar, aged voice spoke from behind, prompting Ash to turn around instinctively. And you are? He looked back to see an old man with a bald head, long white beard, a blue cloak, and a cane. The man studied Ash with the same curiosity Ash had. Are you? Relying on the mole at the corner of his eye, Ash ventured, with uncertainty, Himmel. Haha. Your surprised face is as amusing as Frieren's, Himmel chuckled, stroking his overgrown beard with a warm smile. No, hang on a second. What's wrong? Weren't you shorter than Frieren? Have you finally given up being human and switched professions to dwarf? Staring at the old man who barely reached his shoulder, Ash couldn't conceal his shock and blurted out without thinking. After all, while people may shrink with age, they don't normally become this short. Himmel had shrunk by half a meter, enough that it seemed like a real transformation. After all, while people may shrink with age, they don't typically become this short. Himmel was nearly half a meter shorter than before, so much so that he genuinely seemed like he'd transformed into something else. Himmel's look of shock made him burst into laughter. You really haven't changed at all. You're still as blunt as ever. But don't you think it's a bit much to say that again? No, this definitely isn't normal. What's abnormal is how you've stayed exactly the same. Himmel looked him up and down with a smile. Honestly, it makes me miss you. Seeing you and Frieren together brings back memories of our adventures 50 years ago. Though, you were always absent at the crucial moments, as if you were just stopping by. Well, I'm still weak, after all. Really? Even if Eisen in his prime faced you now, he might not win in close combat, right? Is that so? He didn't respond directly, speaking instead with a vague, confused expression. With a soft sigh, Himmel remarked, even though Eisen has aged, you haven't shown any signs of decline. Truly fitting for a great magician from the mythological era, able to create magic like this. It really is, amazing. By the way, how old are you now? Oh, a little over 100. Really? That's quite something. Anyway, let's not just stand here chatting. Come to my house, let's sit down and catch up properly. Himmel seemed delighted to see his long-lost friend. He didn't want to bring up anything that might spoil the mood. Smiling, he led him through the streets and alleys to the house that had remained unchanged over the past 50 years. Along the way, they continued to talk, and Himmel mentioned that Frieren hadn't visited even once in all these years. As to why, well, every year at our reunion, there are only 3 of us. The 2 of you never show up, almost as if you'd made a pact to avoid it. We sometimes wonder if you've forgotten about us. No, nothing like that, truly. Himmel's slightly resentful tone made him look away in embarrassment, his feelings mixed. It wasn't that he hadn't wanted to come, he'd intended to visit 25 years ago to say farewell to Seria, but she had coldly rejected him. Humans are different from us. Their lives are as fleeting as a blooming flower. Even if the relationship is strong, what's the point? It only leads to wasted time and needless troubles. Don't go. This was the thought that came to mind as he looked at Himmel's face. But seeing his elderly friend now, he couldn't help but wonder why Seria had taken on so many human students if she felt that way. In facing this old friend, as frail as a flickering candle, he began to understand what Seria had meant. As a hero who once saved the world, Himmel's home was surprisingly modest, just a simple, ordinary house. He lit a fire in the fireplace like any elderly person would and took a seat first. Watching him, he realized that Himmel was now a true old man. "What's wrong? Do you want to try it too?" Himmel, gently rocking back and forth in his chair, noticed his gaze on it and asked with a teasing smile, "Shall I get up so you can try it?" Chapter 63, Himmel's silent trust. Frieren, humans are really strange. Seeing how Ash kept glancing at the rocking chair, Himmel, as if understanding his thoughts, placed both hands on the chair and began to move it aside to make room for him. Himmel looked every bit like a grandfather lecturing a stubborn grandchild, so Ash quickly stepped forward and gently held him back, firmly denying, No, I'm just curious. I don't actually want to sit down. At most, I'm just feeling a bit nostalgic. After all, you're just an ordinary old man now." "Haha, what nonsense," Himmel chuckled, shaking his head with a warm smile. "I might still be quite charming for my age, but yes, I'm just an ordinary old man now. However, it seems you haven't changed a bit." "That's true," Ash admitted with a nod. "By the way," Himmel continued, "you're here for the promise we made 50 years ago, aren't you?" "Of course. Well, so is Frieren. She arrived 3 days ago, though I haven't seen her since. Apparently, she left town to retrieve something, heaven knows where she's gone." Himmel sighed but smiled, adding with a teasing glint, "Even though you two have been pretty heartless, never once visiting us, I'm relieved you're not so heartless as to forget our agreement." Sorry. I've just been really busy lately." Ash muttered, feeling slightly guilty about the long absence, as though his old friend's transformation into a dwarf had been kept a secret on purpose. He felt a pang of remorse. "Haha. I'm only kidding. Don't take it so seriously," Himmel reassured him, his smile kind. "To be honest, though, we did worry we might never see you again in this lifetime. It's a blessing to have this chance now. Just being able to see you again brings us such joy. Is that really enough to make you happy?" Ash murmured, feeling a bit unworthy of such warmth, even though he wasn't human at all. Himmel just looked at him with that same gentle, nostalgic smile, reminiscing before he returned to the matter at hand. "When Frieren came, I wrote to Hader and Eisen. They've been in the country for the past few years, and they'll meet us at the city gate tomorrow morning." With an elderly slowness and calm, Himmel added, "So, tell me what you've been up to these past 50 years. It's a rare chance to catch up for an old man like me. After all, you don't have any other commitments here, do you?" "Well, I really don't. I've mostly just been training," Ash admitted with a slight shrug. "I can tell," Himmel said, nodding. "You've made remarkable progress in every respect. But... No, it's nothing. If you're already approaching the end of your life, why push yourself so hard? And while a human's appearance can be fixed, can the body itself remain unchanged forever? Why do you continue to improve?" Himmel didn't voice these questions but instead gently shook his head and looked at Ash with the warmth of an elder observing the younger generation. With a soft smile, he said slowly, "You're our friend. So, we've always been a bit curious about what's been going on between you and Frieren during this time." Yet, Ash found the sudden emphasis on friendship a little unexpected. Coupled with Himmel's previous unspoken question, it felt as though something deeper lingered beneath the surface. But, since Himmel hadn't pressed further, Ash felt no need to explain. After all, there was nothing worth celebrating in his answer. With that thought in mind, he murmured with a hint of reluctance, "Nothing too interesting has happened to me over the years. Does it really matter?" "Oh, it's fine, just tell me." "Well, are you familiar with the Continental Magic Association?" "Ah, yes. I've heard of it. That was founded by your master, wasn't it?" Unable to turn down the warm encouragement, Ash found himself recounting a story he could share about the time he unintentionally knocked down a notable figure in a sparring match. The memory, though embarrassing, held a trace of humor, and he couldn't help but laugh at it now. He also shared a bit about his more recent activities, and as the hours passed, the two of them kept talking until evening, eventually heading out together to a tavern for more drinks and conversation. As for Frieren, who had supposedly arrived before him, he never saw her, nor did he know where she'd gone. The next morning, sunlight streamed softly into the room, filling the cold winter living space with a gentle warmth. The smell of firewood burning lingered in the air, bringing a cozy comfort to the house. Ash, having stayed at Himmel's place, settled himself in the rocking chair by the fireplace after washing up. The rhythmic creaking of the chair and the crackling of the firewood beside him created such a soothing atmosphere that he began to understand why Himmel loved this chair so much. He, too, soon lost himself in the peaceful rhythm, his eyes drifting shut. But, his quiet was soon interrupted as the living room door creaked open, and a voice from behind, familiar even after half a century, spoke. "Is that Ash?" Dazed, he opened his eyes, blinking as he saw the speaker. Frieren stood there, looking both surprised and intrigued, staring at him. "Why, are you here? And what are you doing?" "Ah, do you want to give it a try too?" "And no." Seeing him quickly stand up and offer her the chair, Frieren's instinctive response was to turn down his invitation. It was supposed to be a long-awaited reunion, but watching him lounge so comfortably in the rocking chair, he looked just like Himmel, the elder of the house. It suddenly struck her. Even if Ash's appearance hadn't changed, he seemed, in some intangible way, to have aged, just like Himmel. Though she didn't fully understand what old age should look like in humans, she felt it in the resemblance to Himmel's demeanor. And without meaning to, she found herself asking. "How old are you now?" "I'm a little over 100. 101. Ash answered, reclining comfortably in the rocking chair. "It turns out that if humans are a little lazy, they can really live longer, right?" Frieren replied, crossing her arms as she gave him a sidelong glance. "No, this is still within the normal range probably," Ash responded with a shrug, looking genuinely uncertain. "Is that so?" Frieren raised an eyebrow at him, observing his relaxed demeanor with an odd expression. Truthfully, she had mentally prepared herself this time for the possibility that Ash might not make it here or that he might even be gone by now. She had steeled herself countless times, bracing for the worst. Yet every time she thought him lost, Ash would reappear, alive and well, seemingly undeterred by the years passing by. It was a relief each time, but also exhausting. Noticing her expression, Ash couldn't help but tease, "What's with that look? Are you hoping I'll die soon or something?" "How could I? I thought maybe this time I wouldn't see you again." "It's not that I want you gone," she continued, looking away, "but you keep vanishing and reappearing. It's exhausting to think you're lost, only for you to pop back up like this." She crossed her arms, contemplating something, then remarked, "Come to think of it, isn't this Himmel's house? Why are you in his chair?" Ash laughed. "He went to his room to fetch a hairbrush, probably to neaten himself up. He told me to feel free to sit in it until he gets back." "Uh-huh. Just so we're clear, you didn't get into a fight over the chair with him while I was away, did you?" she asked, half seriously, before a thought made her frown. "Wait a secondisn't Himmel bald. I didn't ask. Bald men can be quite persistent about these things." "I think I remember him saying that," Ash replied, shrugging. "I don't get it. Humans are truly strange," Frieren muttered, shaking her head in mild confusion. She sat opposite him, placing her elbows on the table and resting her chin in one hand as she fixed him with an unhappy stare. "So, what have you been up to for the last 50 years? Word is you were so extreme you didn't even bother visiting anyone." Ash blinked in genuine surprise. "Is that my fault? I thought you'd come to visit. Do you know how sad I was thinking you didn't? All right, I'm sorry, okay? I was busy." She bit her lip, frustration creeping into her voice. "It's strange, but 49 years flew by without me noticing. Wait, no, hold on." She narrowed her eyes in displeasure as realization dawned on her, sensing Ash's usual playful trap. But before she could say more, he waved his hand dismissively. Forget it. I'll let it slide this time. Let's just move on, shall we? But hey, I wouldn't mind if you helped push the chair a little while you're at it. Are you a grandpa now or something? And by the way, you have no right to be lecturing me on visiting." Realizing she'd been tricked, Frieren's face showed reluctant resignation. But, after a sigh and a moment's hesitation, she stood up, moved behind him, and began to rock the chair slowly. In that warm, fire-lit room, a sense of peace filled the space. Friends reunited, the crackling of the fire mingling with the faint creak of the chair as Frieren gently rocked Ash. For a moment, All felt serene and timeless. When Himmel finally emerged from his room, he paused in the doorway, a slightly baffled smile on his face. Seeing the two of them, Ash nodding off contentedly in the chair, and Frieren almost drifting herself as she rocked him, he was unsure what to say. With a blend of amusement and helplessness, he tapped his cane on the ground gently, breaking the odd, yet somehow perfect tranquility that had enveloped them all. Chapter 64, The Last Journey of the Hero. The old friends are like leaves falling in the wind, withering away. __________. The three of them walked out of the royal capital, shoulder to shoulder. Just beyond the city gate, they spotted two figures waiting by the edge of the city wall, a tall man and a shorter figure. Despite being an alcoholic and a known drunkard, Hayter remained impressively tall, and even though 50 years had passed, he didn't look drastically different. His face bore deep wrinkles, and he looked somewhat aged, but surprisingly, he wore the same style of robes as before. Perhaps he had donned them specially for today's gathering. Ash couldn't resist a tease. You finally look like a real priest. You're no longer the drunken priest you used to be. Should I say you've grown more respectable or something? That's because I'm now the bishop of the holy city, Hayter replied with a proud grin, shrugging slightly as he looked at the two. A sigh escaped him. You two really haven't changed at all. A priest who only cares about food and wine, becoming a bishop. Frieren muttered, amused. Haha. Looks like I'm blessed by the goddess, unlike someone here who's probably managed to offend her, Hayter chuckled smugly, looking far from the pious figure a bishop should be. Offended? Hey. Ash mused aloud. What? Any clues? Did you actually do something disrespectful to the goddess? Hayter asked, intrigued. Well, when I was young, I might have had a bit too much to drink back in the village and, held onto a statue while I vomited everywhere. Does that count? What do you mean, does it count? Of course, you'll be punished for that. Hayter looked momentarily taken aback, despite his own easygoing relationship with alcohol. Even the usually silent dwarf, Eisen, couldn't help but sigh. The mystery we've wondered about for years finally has an answer. Unlike the two humans, Eisen hadn't changed much over the years. But Ash, glancing at him, couldn't resist asking, you've aged, too, haven't you? Really? Has Eisen changed at all? Frieren couldn't help but glance over curiously. With a hint of nostalgia, Eisen closed his eyes and replied, while my appearance may not have changed much, everything within the body's functions has aged. It's certainly not like before. Is that so? Frieren turned to Ash, perplexed. But he seems stronger, doesn't he? Come to think of it, all of you have weakened, yet Ash somehow grew stronger. That's because Ash began, but Himmel interrupted with a gentle smile, human constitutions vary widely. Is that right? Frieren tilted her head in confusion. Remember Azer? He was one of the strongest warriors among humans, wasn't he? Even after a dragon bit off part of his head, he still survived, Hayter explained, smiling. A normal person could never handle that. So maybe Ash here has a particularly resilient body. Who knows, maybe he'll even live another 20 years. True, Eisen nodded. Even after being bitten by a snake whose venom could kill monsters, Azer survived through sheer willpower. He was once shot by a poisoned arrow strong enough to make a dragon faint, but he bounced right back. Other dwarves wouldn't be able to withstand that kind of damage at all. Exactly, Hayter added, patting Eisen's helmet with a grin, then turned to Ash, a mischievous glint in his eyes. Ash, I'm starting to think your body might be as ridiculously resilient as Eisen's. Ash lowered his head, speaking vaguely, unsure of what to say in this moment. Because compared to the somewhat oblivious Frieren, the others had clearly picked up on something. Yet, they showed no signs of asking about it or even hinting at what they'd realized. Were they just pretending not to notice, or were they worried that, even with their combined strength, their age might leave them too frail to confront him? No, that couldn't be it. Though he didn't fully understand their reasons, this was the one thing Ash felt certain about. After Himmel and Hayter's explanations, Frieren, though still a little confused, eventually accepted their perspective. She knew her understanding of humans was nowhere near as deep as that of these two older men and, ultimately, chose not to dwell on it any longer. She never considered that they might be lying to her after all. Why lie about something so trivial in everyday life? And with that minor episode behind them, the group, carrying only light provisions, set out on this final adventure. They walked under the gentle morning sun, crossed winding rivers, climbed mountain ridges, and camped in serene forests. Each new day, as sunlight filtered through dense leaves casting a pattern of light and shadow, they continued their journey, accompanied by a gentle breeze. In this way, they traveled leisurely, and after about a week, they reached lake, nestled atop a mountain. At sunset, these old friends who had been reunited after so long gathered on the grassy banks, chatting as they waited for nightfall. You know, Ash, Frieren said, suddenly recalling something as she turned to the boy who hadn't aged and smiled. Didn't you make a wish all those years ago, wanting to watch shooting stars with a lovely, serious girl? And now here we are. Yeah, I suppose I did, Ash replied. 50 years, and still no luck. She teased. I've been training all this time. The candidates who came my way were all a bit unusual. Honestly, compared to them, you seem much more normal. Only now did he remember the wish he'd made 50 years ago. Reflecting on it, he realized he had spent half a century in the same old monotony. It was a bitter thought, and he didn't even know how to express his frustration. Seeing his troubled expression, Frieren softened. She shook her head with a gentle smile and, together with Himmel, put a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Watching this, Hader couldn't help but feel nostalgic. Smiling, he straightened his glasses and said, "Isn't this nice? If things don't work out this time, you've still got another 50 years to look for someone. And if you can't, well, we'll be here next time too if we're still around." Himmel stroked his beard, adding, "There's no rush. Since we're seeing another shooting star, why don't we make another wish now? Forget it. It's pointless anyway." "Wishing again now would only leave me feeling more empty," Ash replied. "Really? But I think this isn't so bad," Himmel mused as he gazed up at the sky, smiling. "It really takes me back. Being with all of you is like reliving the days when we traveled together." Frieren raised her head with a grin, boasting unreservedly, "Of all of us, I'm the most reliable one here." "You?" Himmel chuckled warmly. He chose not to mention her embarrassing past, when treasure chest traps would often catch her off guard. Instead, he watched as the first meteor streaked across the night sky and murmured thoughtfully, "Now that I think about it, you've always been part of my fondest memories." "Isn't that a bit sad?" Ash said, shaking his head with a faint smile as he gave Himmel a gentle pat on his bald head. "Isn't this supposed to be a happy time? You really lack respect for your elders," Himmel sighed with a wry smile, though he didn't brush Ash's hand away. Instead, he lifted his gaze toward the sky and whispered, "Frieren, because of you, I get to experience this wonderful adventure again." Frieren glanced over curiously but remained silent. Himmel then lowered his voice further, leaning in to address the young man beside him. "And Ash? What is it? From now on, I'll be relying on you to look after Frieren and the humans. That's quite a lot to take on all of a sudden. I know you can handle it." "Why?" Ash asked, a bit surprised. "It's my intuition." Himmel smiled, leaving his answer at that. Their conversation was meant only for the two of them, with Hader, seated nearby, overhearing. Meanwhile, Frieren and the other companion were lost in the splendor of the night sky, captivated by its serene beauty, as if it offered them a glimpse into the mysteries of life itself. After fulfilling their 50-year-old promise, the group returned to the city, their laughter and joy marking a bittersweet end to their journey. But, on the very first night back in the city, Himmel quietly passed away in his sleep, his wish seemingly fulfilled, with nothing more to tether him to this world. He left peacefully, a gentle smile gracing his face. To honor the departed hero, the kingdom held a solemn funeral at the cathedral in the capital. Soldiers in full regalia formed the honor guard, while Hader personally presided over the ceremony. People from all corners of the city gathered, those who had been touched by Himmel's kindness coming to bid him farewell. The low, mournful tones of the funeral music echoed through the cathedral, filling it with an atmosphere of both reverence and sorrow. Throughout the crowd, soft sobs and deep sighs broke the silence, and every face reflected a sense of loss. Even Frieren, who once thought Ash had perished and had known that sorrow, now lowered her gaze, her expression one of quiet grief. In a voice barely above a whisper, she murmured words only she could hear, "Human lifespans are so fleeting. Had even elves come to change after all these years?" Ash looked at Frieren but chose to remain silent. Instead, his gaze returned to Himmel's still, smiling form in the coffin, and he, too, echoed her sentiment, "Yes, human lifespans are indeed short." As he stood there, Watching his old friend rest eternally, Ash found himself understanding why Seria had long avoided deep connections with humans. When his eyes drifted to Hader, he felt a deep ache, knowing it might not be long before he'd attend his old friend's funeral, too. Perhaps, Ash thought, it would be best to leave once this farewell was over and maybe never return.
Thanks for listening.